Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today we are going to be tackling a topic that I think is on everyone's minds these days, and that is immigration.
Yeah.
We are going to be examining the ethical and global implications of immigration, and we're going to be doing that through a couple of really interesting lenses.
Okay.
We're going to be using Catholic social teaching and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Interesting.
So we have an excerpt from a document called Catholic Social Teaching on Immigration and the Movement of Peoples.
Right.
And we have an article that focuses on Article 14
Mm-hmm.
of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the right to asylum.
Okay.
So this deep dive is for you if you've ever kind of felt like, whoa, where do I even begin with this huge topic of immigration? So
Yeah, it's a big one, and it can be tough to know where to even start.
you really can.
Yeah.
So let's unpack the first source,
Okay.
Catholic Social Teaching on Immigration and the Movement of Peoples. One of the things that stood out to me right away in reading this document was how it lays out these three principles that seem to be in tension with each other.
Yeah. They do seem a little paradoxical at first glance. Like,
Yeah.
how can these all coexist?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the first principle states that people have the right to migrate to sustain their lives and their families' lives.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't about seeking luxury or, a better job even.
Right.
This is about survival.
Basic needs. Exactly.
Yeah.
Food, shelter. Yeah.
But then the second principle says that a country has the right to regulate its borders and control immigration.
Oh.
Okay.
So how did we...
How do we reconcile that?
Yes. How do we reconcile those two ideas?
Well, I think that's where the concept of the common good comes in.
Okay.
And so you can think about it this way.
Okay.
Each country has a responsibility to ensure the well-being of its citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes things like maintaining order
Right.
and security and stability.
So, unrestricted open borders could potentially undermine that stability.
Right.
But at the same time, we have to recognize the inherent dignity of every human being.
Yes.
And we can't simply slam the door on those who are in desperate need.
So it's a balancing act.
It is a balancing act.
And that leads us to the third principle, which is a country must regulate its borders with justice and mercy.
Yeah.
What does that look like in practical terms?
It means creating immigration policies that are enforceable but also humane.
Okay.
So we need to uphold the rule of law
Mm-hmm.
while at the same time recognizing the complexities of human migration.
Okay.
For example, think about family reunification.
Yeah.
Tearing families apart goes against the very principles of human dignity that Catholic social teaching emphasizes.
Absolutely. And that makes me think about the story of the rich man and Lazarus that the document uses.
Oh, yeah.
The rich man wasn't condemned for his wealth, but for his indifference to the suffering of Lazarus at his doorstep. And it seems to suggest that building walls, whether literal or figurative, to keep out those in need is a form of moral negligence.
Yeah. It's a powerful analogy, isn't it?
It is.
It really is.
It makes you think.
It does. It challenges us to think about, are we turning a blind eye to suffering, or are we actively working to create a more just and compassionate world?
And how do we
Immigration
improve
policy
those?
becomes a tangible expression of those values.
Yeah. So how does justice and mercy play out when we are talking about specific situations,
Okay.
like undocumented immigrants, for example?
It means ensuring that all people,
Okay.
regardless of their legal status,
Mm-hmm.
have access to basic human rights, things like health care,
Okay.
education, fair treatment under the law.
Mm-hmm.
It also means taking a nuanced approach to enforcement, recognizing that many undocumented immigrants are contributing members of society.
Right.
Often they're working essential jobs, raising families, and, just...
So it's about seeing beyond the labels.
And recognizing the individual human stories
Yes.
behind the statistics.
It is, and it's about creating systems that prioritize human dignity and compassion,
Yeah.
even as we grapple with, the very real challenges of managing migration flows.
Right. Wow, it feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
There's so much more to unpack here.
Absolutely.
This leads us perfectly into our second source, which focuses on Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights,
Okay.
the right to asylum.
Right.
This article has such a powerful historical context.
Yeah, it emerged from the ashes of World War II and the Holocaust.
Right?
It's a stark reminder of what can happen when people are denied refuge from persecution.
It's like the people who drafted the UDHR were saying, never again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They wanted to create a global framework that would protect those fleeing for their lives, ensure that they could find safety and a chance to rebuild their lives.
And it's made a difference.
It has made a difference.
Like, think about the mass naturalization of Burundian refugees in Tanzania. Oh, yeah.
Back in 1972.
That's right.
That was a direct result of Article 14.
It was. And it's a testament to its power to save lives.
Right.
Yeah.
But even with Article 14, it seems like there are limitations and gray areas.
Yeah.
Not everyone who's forced to leave their home qualifies for asylum, right?
That's true. Article 14 specifically mentions that it doesn't apply to those fleeing prosecution for non-political crimes or acts contrary to the principles of the United Nations.
Okay.
So, someone accused of a serious crime wouldn't be granted asylum simply by claiming persecution.
Right.
And even for those who do qualify, the process can be incredibly challenging.
Our research mentioned this term, Fortress Europe.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, it sounds pretty daunting for anyone seeking refuge.
It's a term used to describe the increasingly restrictive policies and border security measures that many European countries have adopted in recent years.
Right.
The idea is to make it more difficult and dangerous to enter Europe, basically to deter migration.
Right.
But the consequences can be dire.
I imagine so.
People are forced to take incredibly risky journeys, often falling prey to smugglers and facing hostile conditions once they arrive.
It seems like there's a real disconnect between the spirit of Article 14 with its emphasis on protection.
Right.
And then the reality on the ground.
Yeah, you've hit on a crucial point. The world has changed dramatically since 1948 when the UDHR was adopted.
Right.
We're facing new challenges like climate change,
Yes.
mass displacement, global inequality. And these are all forcing us to re-examine the traditional definitions of refugee and asylum seeker.
What about people fleeing climate change or famine?
Yeah.
They're being forced from their homes just like those fleeing political persecution.
Right.
But they don't always fit neatly into that traditional definition of refugee.
That's where the concept of protection gaps comes in.
Okay.
There are people who are clearly in need of international protection.
Right.
But they fall outside the scope of existing legal frameworks.
Wow.
It's a huge challenge that the international community is grappling with.
So how do we define a climate refugee?
Right.
What obligations do countries have to those displaced, the rising sea levels or desertification?
Those are the questions.
Huge questions.
Absolutely. It raises really complex questions about national sovereignty, global responsibility, and the very nature of human rights in a changing world.
Are there any potential solutions on the horizon?
Wow.
I read about something called the Global Compact for Migration.
Yeah, the Global Compact for Migration, it's a non-binding agreement among UN member states, and it's actually quite groundbreaking.
In what way?
Well, it recognizes that migration is a global phenomenon that requires international cooperation and a more comprehensive approach.
What does that look like in practice?
For one thing, it encourages countries to develop policies that address the root causes of forced migration.
Like what?
Like poverty, conflict, climate change.
Okay.
It also promotes things like planned relocation.
What's that?
Where people are moved to safer areas in a coordinated and humane way. Okay.
And it explores new visa options that could provide legal pathways for those fleeing situations that don't fit the traditional refugee definition.
So it sounds like a shift from simply reacting to migration to proactively addressing the factors that are driving it.
That's a good way to put it.
But if we start expanding the definition of refugee to include those fleeing climate change, for example, doesn't that potentially open the floodgates?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it's one that fuels a lot of the debate. Some argue that broadening the definition could overwhelm already strained asylum systems.
Right.
Others maintain that failing to act will lead to even greater humanitarian crises down the road.
So there's no easy answer.
Not really. There rarely is when it comes to complex global issues.
Yeah.
But I think the Global Compact for Migration represents a step in the right direction.
Okay.
It's an acknowledgement that the world is changing. And our responses to migration need to evolve as well.
We can't cling to outdated definitions and policies that no longer reflect the realities on the ground.
It makes you wonder, what does it even mean to be a global citizen in a world where traditional borders are becoming increasingly porous?
That's a profound question, and one that goes beyond the scope of immigration policy.
Right.
It challenges us to think about our interconnectedness and our shared humanity. If we believe in the inherent dignity of every human being, What does that mean for our obligations to those in need, regardless of where they were born or how they arrived at our doorstep?
It feels like we've gone really deep on this,
Yeah.
and I'm realizing how much I didn't know.
Hmm.
It's not just about laws and policies. It's
Right.
about our values,
Yeah.
our sense of responsibility, and what kind of world we want to create.
It really is about expanding our understanding of what it means to be human in a globalized world.
So let's try to pull together some of the key threads from this deep dive.
Okay.
We started with Catholic social teaching, which emphasized the right to migrate,
Mm-hmm.
but also the right of nations to regulate their borders.
Yeah. And we saw how that tension plays out in the real world,
Right.
where countries are trying to balance security concerns with their moral obligations to those seeking refuge.
Right. Then we explored Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights,
Okay.
which guarantees the right to seek asylum from persecution.
Right.
But we also acknowledged that the world has changed a lot since 1948,
It has.
when the UDHR was adopted.
Yeah.
And the traditional definition of refugee is being challenged by new realities, like climate change
Mm-hmm.
and mass displacement.
Yeah, and that's where things get really complex.
Mhm.
How do we adapt our legal frameworks
Mhm.
and our moral compass to a world where the reasons for migration are evolving and the lines between economic migrant and refugee are becoming increasingly blurred?
Yeah, it feels like we're at a crossroads.
You're
We can either cling to these outdated notions of sovereignty and borders, or we can embrace a more global, compassionate approach that recognizes our interconnectedness.
Yeah, and the choices we make will have profound consequences, not just for migrants, but for the future of humanity itself.
What stands out to me is this idea of protection gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Situations where people are clearly in need, but fall outside the scope of existing legal protections.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, are our systems failing those who need them most?
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
It is.
And it forces us to ask some tough questions.
Like,
What are our values?
Yeah.
What kind of world do we want to live in? And what are our responsibilities to those less fortunate than ourselves, regardless of where they were born or how they came to be in need?
it feels like this conversation goes beyond policy debates
It does.
and legal definitions.
Yeah.
It's about our shared humanity and the kind of future we want to build together.
You've hit the nail on the head. Immigration is a microcosm of so many larger issues. Poverty, inequality, conflict, climate change.
Right.
The list goes on, and the way we respond to it will reveal a lot about who we are as individuals and as a global community.
So where do we go from here?
That's the big question.
What can we as individuals do to contribute to a more just and compassionate approach to immigration?
I think the first step is to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
The more we understand the complexities of the issue, the better equipped we are to engage in meaningful dialogue and advocate for change.
And to challenge our own assumptions and biases.
Absolutely. We need to be willing to listen to different perspectives, even those that make us uncomfortable.
Really?
Because at the end of the day, this is about people's lives,
Mm-hmm.
their hopes, their dreams, their struggles.
It's about recognizing that behind the statistics and the headlines are real human beings.
Exactly.
Each with their own unique story.
And those stories deserve to be heard, not just by policymakers, but by all of us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'll
What?
leave you with a final thought. If we truly believe in the inherent dignity of every human being, what does that mean for how we treat those who are seeking a better life, a safer haven, a chance to simply exist?
That's a question we each need to grapple with. And the answers we come up with will shape not only the future of immigration, but the very soul of our world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some new insights and perhaps even sparked some challenging questions. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing for a world where everyone has the opportunity to live a life of dignity and hope.